Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining this webinar today to explore how you can grow your business in Europe through the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, much better known as the CETA. My name is Nigel Neal. I am the Director of Strategic Trade Engagement and Team Canada Trade Missions here at Global Affairs Canada and part of the Trade Commissioner Service. Clearly, the importance of diversifying has never been more important than now, given the current political environment. Europe, of course, has always been in focus, but never more than now. Very briefly, some objectives for today. The objectives are very straightforward. We want to provide you with an overview of how you, Canadian SMEs, can better utilize the CETA. What are the key provisions to benefit from? I want to mention your company may be impacted by US tariffs. This is an opportunity to review the available tools to help you diversify out and away from the US market. I'll mention that our TCS website, if a colleague could put that in the chat, please, tradecommissioner.gc.ca. We have many new resources, including a 1-800 hotline for immediate assistance and queries, specifically around the impact of tariffs with the US. So today's presentations and our expert speakers will address these themes. So before we get in, I would like to introduce and take the opportunity to welcome a special guest, Mr. Andre van Walter, Head of the Trade and Economic Section at the Delegation of the European Union to Canada, based here in Ottawa as well. So Andre, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Nigel and the team from Global Affairs to allow me to participate in today's workshop on how to increase exports via CETA. As you noticed, this is a very timely topic. Our trade agreement CETA is already in place since 2017, and it has proven to be very successful already. Since its application, up to 99% of tariffs between the EU and Canada have been eliminated. And according to our EU statistics, this has contributed to an increase in 65% of our bilateral trade in goods and of 73% of our bilateral trade in services. But we believe that we can do more. Our trade agreement CETA is still not known by all companies and traders in the EU and in Canada, and some of its provision might sometimes be a bit complex to navigate. And this may also explain, at least partially, why the so-called preference utilization rates of CETA, which are those parts of our bilateral trade that happen under the provisions of CETA, not outside, are still not as high as you would like them to be. And this is why I think that activities like this workshop today are particularly useful in these times. We believe that EU-Canada trade under CETA still presents a lot of untapped potential. Taken together, the European Union and Canada represent a market of nearly 500 million people. If we add to this all potential consumers and suppliers under the EU's other 75 trade agreements in force, and everybody who's covered by Canada's trade agreements, including, for example, the very large CPTPP agreement, we stand here in front of a huge, gigantic, integrated, rules-based trading market. It is true that in the field of trade policy, we are currently going through turbulent times, and in these times, the EU-Canada trade agreement CETA appears like a transatlantic bridge that stretches over a stormy, increasingly stormy sea. But we think it's a solid bridge. We can trust it to resist pressure. And what I hope we can all learn today is how we can increase the traffic on that bridge so that more Canadians use it to cross the Atlantic towards Europe. So with this in mind, on behalf of the European Union delegation to Canada, I wish you a very instructive and inspiring seminar. And for the future, please also do not hesitate to reach out to our team here in Ottawa. In case of questions, we are working very closely together with our friends at Global Affairs Canada to make CETA become even more successful. Thank you very much and have a good session today.
Thank you so much, Andre. Very, very good to hear those comments. And I personally really appreciate you saying how we need to work together to increase the foot traffic and frankly, the speed of that foot traffic across the pond, across the bridge. So that's why we're here today. So again, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be able to work with such trusted partners as yourself and the European Union. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to my colleague Danielle McDade, who's going to speak briefly and give a short economic overview of Europe and CETA ratification and implementation. So over to you, Danielle. Thank you.
So before we dive into an overview of the key CETA chapters and their practical applications, we wanted to take this opportunity to provide a very brief economic outlook, including on Canada-EU trade, as Nigel just mentioned. So as you will see on this slide, in the recent April World Economic Outlook report, the IMF forecasts a significant deceleration in global economic growth in 2025. And this trend is seen in almost all regions and countries. However, some private forecasters are predicting recessions, the IMF is still expecting Canada and the EU will post positive growth this year and next. That said, as we're all aware, the outlook is more uncertain these days. There are many downside risks, the primary being escalating trade measures and prolonged trade policy uncertainty. However, on the upside, Canada has seen its trade with the EU steadily rise over the past years, spurred by CETA. Since the agreement entered into force, Canadian goods and services exports have increased 58% to reach 59 billion Canadian dollars in 2024. Canadian imports also increased 66% to reach 103 billion in 2024. On the export side, while Canadian exports have increased to the EU, this growth has been in pace with Canada's overall export growth. In other words, the EU's share in Canadian exports at 6% has not risen in recent years. Given the current uncertainty in the global trade environment, Global Affairs Canada and the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service are looking to help Canadian exporters find opportunities to export to reliable trade partners like the EU, which will be covered later in the presentation. A quick word about CETA ratification. Most CETA provisions have been in force since September 21st, 2017. We're often asked what provisionally enforced means when not all EU member states have ratified the agreement. The most important thing to keep in mind is that most CETA benefits, including preferential tariff treatment on goods, apply to all EU member states, including those that have not yet completed ratification. It's also important to note that in addition to CETA, Canada's FTA coverage in Europe also includes the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement, the Canada-European Free Trade Association, EFTA, Free Trade Agreement, and the modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. On the Canada-UK Agreement, following the UK's departure from the EU, we replicated the CETA for a bilateral Canada-UK trade arrangement. It provides tariff-free access to 99% of tariff lines and includes the same high standard of obligations as the CETA. The EFTA agreement is a goods-only agreement with the countries of Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. It's been in force since 2009. The agreement with Ukraine originally entered into force in 2017, but it's recently been updated with a modernized agreement that includes ambitious commitments in key sectors, including digital trade, investment, and inclusive economic growth, which entered into force on July 1st, 2024. I would now like to introduce our next set of speakers and invite them to turn on their cameras. Fabien Lehota, Jeremy Lefebvre from Global Affairs Canada, and Jean Toussaint Battistini, who's a visiting economist from the government of France. The presenters will do a deep dive into the most relevant CETA chapters for Canadian businesses, provide real-world examples of market advantages under CETA, and do a quick tools demonstration to navigate CETA benefits effectively. Next slide, please. And Jeremy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Danielle, for this amazing introduction. We will now briefly go over the key chapters and practical applications that we will be covering during this workshop, such as tariff eliminations, good and service market access, product classifications. But we will also conduct a demonstration of different tools to hopefully help you grow your business within the EU, as well as much more. FTAs such as CETA can help Canadian exporters by eliminating tariffs and non-tariffs barrier and by creating consistent and transparent rules and procedures for doing business within the EU, which amounts for greater security to Canadian businesses for doing business within the EU. Like all of Canada's FTA, if CETA had to be summarized in 4 key points, they would be the following. Non-discrimination ensures that Canadian companies are treated in the exact same way as a domestic company when operating in a foreign market, such as Germany, for example, which means that a Canadian company will be treated in the exact same way as a German company when doing business in Germany. Then we have transparency, which means that Canada's trading partners agree to make the rules for accessing their different markets and operating in them visible and available to the public, which means that you can find these rules and provisions with any search engine by doing a simple search. Next, we have predictable rules, which binds Canada's trading partners to adhere to specific rules that provide traders and investors with predictability, confidence, and the security of their investments, which adds a greater layer of confidence to Canadian companies who want to do business within the EU. And finally, Canada's FTA like CETA give preferential access to Canadian businesses, which opens export opportunities within the EU's different markets. I will now leave you in the capable hands of my colleague Fabien for the next slide.
So before I dive into the product classification slide that you see here on the screen, I just want to share with you a couple of words on the market access for goods chapter. This chapter is probably the most well-known and very important as well. You will have a very comprehensive demonstration and explanation of this chapter in the next minutes. So the primary goal of the market access for goods chapter is to lower or eliminate tariffs on your products, meaning that Canadian exporters are more competitive in FTA markets. They may win more contracts and compete on a level playing field with other foreign competitors in these markets. There is also a greater chance to integrate international supply chains. And you may also be able to get cheaper components and inputs from FTA markets, increasing your margins and competitiveness for your products. So how does it work when we're saying that CETA or any FTA that Canada has eliminate tariffs or reduces them? Well, the first thing that we have to look at is what we call the HS code, which is established by the World Customs Organization, and it basically ensures that all traded goods, everything that you see around yourself right now, are classified via system, the harmonized system, HS code again. And this code allows the border agency to establish a tariff when the good enters the country to where you're exporting. The first 6 digits that you see on the screen here are the same across the globe for any country that is part of the World Customs Organization. The remaining digits are up to the discretion of each importing market. And we've seen HS codes going up to 11 digits, for example, in Japan. And the idea here is to narrow down to specific products rather than keeping it general. So as an example, if you're exporting tables, well, you may want a different digit, HS code, sorry, regarding the material with which this table is made of. For example, if it's a wooden table or a plastic one, they will have different HS codes. One of the ways to determine your HS code is to visit our tariff finder website that you can see here at the bottom of the slide, and this software will help you identify what is your HS code, and we'll do a quick demo in a few slides just to show you how it works. Very user-friendly. Once you have determined the correct HS code, the tariff finder will be able to give you two information, and we're speaking about CETA right now. First, what is the tariff for this specific product under CETA? And second, what is the specific tariff for what we call the most favored nation, MFN rate, which is the tariff that is faced by all WTO members that don't have an FTA with Canada. So for example, if we're coming back to the tables example, if I'm exporting tables made out of plastic to the EU, I may face a 0% tariff, whereas any other WTO member may have a 10% tariff. So we determined that the tariff preference here is of 10%. This is what we call the preferential margin. But as good as this looks, it doesn't stop here, because you need to confirm that your product meets the rules of origin. The rules of origin determine if a good is originating and therefore eligible to tariff preference. What we mean by originating, differently said, we may think of, is it sufficiently Canadian to be able to deserve or allowed a reduced tariff or complete elimination of the tariff at the borders? And my colleague Jean Toussaint will go through the rules of origin that apply to CETA in very specific details. Once you confirm the rules of origin, you may be able to claim preferential treatment. However, this is not automatic. It's always the importer that is claiming the preferential tariff, and to do so, they need to have the correct HS code in hand and a confirmation, a certificate that your product meets the rules of origin. They submit that to the border agency of the importing country, and then they get the reimbursement of the tariff if there is a tariff applied at the border. But you may probably be asking yourselves right now, well, Fabien, this looks very, this looks great. I have my HS code. I think I know my rules. I think I know that my product meets the rules of origin, but is there a way to confirm this information with 100% certainty? Well, the answer is yes. CETA does have a mechanism included in the agreement that allows you to contact the border agency of the importer market, and ask them if the HS code that you have selected, chosen, and identified, and the rules of origin that you think that meet the ones negotiated in CETA, they will provide you with an answer within 120 days. And once they provide you with a confirmation, it's a binding decision. So with all your export documentation, you join that decision, and the agency, the border agency that will receive your product, will have to honor that decision. And once you have all these details in hand, you're ready to export. One thing that I want to mention is that there is flexibility around the time or the moment when you claim the reduced tariff. For Canada, we are allowing the importer to do it within 4 years from the date of importation. For Europe, it varies by member state, but generally it's around 3 years from the date of importation. So, for example, just to put this in more concrete life example, a Belgian importer brings in Canadian seafood, but forgets to claim CETA preferences. Let's say 6 months later, they obtain the statement of origin from their Canadian supplier and apply for a refund of duties paid at import. So see, it was not done automatically on the day that they received the merchandise. They went to the agency 6 months later and were able to receive the refund for the duties paid.
Yeah, as Fabian mentioned, indeed, you can ask the Canadian or the European customs to have the binding tariff origin or binding tariff information. I won't go into full detail because Fabian already explained it clearly. So if you don't know like the HS code of your product, because sometimes they can be very difficult to identify. For example, handbags, for example, whether it is handmade or not, it won't be the same HS code. So for a simple product as that, imagine the differences they can be between like more complex product that you could export. So you can ask both the French, European, and the Canadian customs the binding tariff information, which will give you like the HS code of your product, which is a decision which is like enforceable against the customs. So when it's given to you, like you can say to another customs officer, this is the decision given by the customs agency. So it will work for 3 years as mentioned, but you can also ask the same thing for the origin. You have the HS code of your product, you think you qualify for the rule of origin, but you want an advanced decision on the origin, you can ask the same thing. Both the European Union, which is the EDTI platform, which is like a union of all the European countries, the customs agency, or the Canadian customs. So next slide, please. So you have like two tools that have been developed to first identify the HS codes, and then another one, which is a European developed tools that go a little bit beyond just the tariff, the HS code identification and the tariff identification. Access to markets, and what we will see in the demonstration afterwards is that it will give you first the tariff, it also gives you the requirement for license and certifications you need, but also then it will help you to ask a set of questions to identify like if you qualify actually for the rule of origin. So it will ask you different set of questions based on your product, based on the way it's like produced, like is it like with originating materials or with non-originating raw materials, and then it will give you if you qualify under CETA or not. So first, we're going to just do like a very quick demonstration of Tariff Finder, which is the Canadian tool. And then after a few slides, we will do like the access to market presentations. Of course, you want to export to a European country, and it doesn't matter like what kind of European country. Like we are 27 countries, but CETA is a free trade agreement for all European countries. So let's say for the sake of this example, you want to export, I don't know, like handbags, for example. The subheading, like 4 digits called HS code is like 4402. But you can also like write the description of your product. You could write handbags instead, but we'll just do like 4402 for the sake. Oh, it's not 44, it's 42. Sorry, just my bad. 4202. And now you see that you can browse through the HS classification, the nomenclature, and you see depending on like handbags, for example, depending if it's made out of leather or textile, it's not the same HS code. And as you can see then, first, you see that you have like the MFN tariff. If you don't claim the free trade agreement, what the importer will have to pay if you don't claim the agreement for them, and the preferential tariff you have, which is 0%, thanks to CETA. And this tool, Tariff Finder, works for all free trade agreement Canada has, so it's very helpful to identify like the tariff you're facing or not. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So just to end about like the Tariff Finder, basically it means that first you identify the HS code, and thanks to the HS code you identify if there is a tariff on the good you want to export or not. And then if you can benefit from a free trade agreement which is like a preferential tariff. So understanding the rules of origin under CETA means that it's very important to have the HS classification, as mentioned before. One HS code means like one product means one rule of origin. Like for all the free trade agreements Canada has, each product has its own rules of origin. So this is why it's important to not misclassify your product, otherwise you will not respect the correct rule of origin. Of course, your product has to go under beyond just insufficient transformation. You cannot import just goods from China, for example, repackage them, relabel them, and then send them to Europe. No, even if you use non-originating raw materials and intermediate consumption, you have to create some value. You have to transform the product from raw materials and intermediate consumption to a final product, which will be like a different HS code from the HS code of your raw materials, for example. And then you also have to respect the direct transport rule. The direct transport rule means basically that, okay, you're about to export your goods to the European Union. By ship, by plane, doesn't matter. If the plane or the ship stops by a third country, for example, the United Kingdom, which is not part of the European Union anymore, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, or the United States, in this third country, the product that you're about to export, you must not go through like another transformation. So no relabeling, no repackaging, no final transformation in this third country before entering the European market. Otherwise, the European customs could revoke the preferential tariff. So you just have to be aware of that. Then it doesn't matter when it enters the European market if it undergoes under relabeling, repackaging, but it's not allowed in a third country. So 4 principles guide the rules of origin in CETA, but it's also like for every free trade agreement actually, but we think about CETA. So the 2 first ones are basically the most common rules of origin you will see under CETA. The first one, HS chapter heading or subheading change, just to simplify a little bit what it means, it basically means that, okay, you take raw materials, intermediate consumptions. Doesn't matter if the raw materials or the intermediate consumption is from Canada, from the European Union. It can be from a third country, not related to the European Union or Canada. What matters is that you take this raw material, this intermediate consumption, and you turn it into a final product. For example, you want to make handbags. Okay, doesn't matter the leather comes from the United States, China, India, Turkey, or another third country. What matters is that you turn this leather into a handbag, into a wallet in Canada, and then you export it to the European Union. Same thing on the other side. The other principle means basically it's mainly for the automotive, for some agri-food products, or for some cosmetics. Basically, it means that, okay, you can use both originating and Canadian raw materials and non-Canadian raw materials. What matters is that you don't use non-originating raw materials higher than a certain threshold. So basically for automotive, to give you an example, your car, your spare part, you need to have at least 50% of this product, which is made out of Canadian intermediate consumption or raw materials. Then the only obtained rule in the EU or Canada is quite simple. It basically applies to agricultural or agri-food products, this eggplant, these cereals, this rice, and so on. I mean, like, you need to harvest it in Canada. Same thing for fish, same thing for animals, for meat, for example. So only obtained. And then for the textile and the apparel industry, basically it has to go under specific processing rules. So I won't go into detail, but depending on the product, you will have a very specific and very simple rule of origin to understand. So basically it means like you have to go under this specific process in Canada to be qualified under CETA. So this is basically for this type of industry. And thanks to that, you will benefit from the preferential tariffs. So of course, you have these 4 principles, but CETA is a free trade agreement meant to be used by SMEs. And you have like 3 flexibilities to claim CETA, even if you think you don't qualify for it. The first one is the absorption principle. So let's say you take an intermediate consumption, which was made from non-originating raw materials. For example, you take raw materials from, I don't know, like India. you make an intermediate consumption. So you turned non-Canadian raw materials into an intermediate consumption in Canada, and then you use this intermediate consumption to include it into a final product, a bigger product. Thanks to the absorption principle, all of it will be entirely considered 100% Canadian, which helps you to qualify under the rule, even if you think you don't qualify for it. Then you have the bilateral accumulation, which basically means that you can use raw materials, intermediate consumptions from a country from the European Union to make your product here in Canada, and then send it back as a final product or another intermediate consumption to the European Union. It will be fully considered as Canadian. So if you want to trade with the European Union, try to use some European raw materials and intermediate consumption. It will be quite easier. And then, and of course, the bilateral accumulation works if the raw materials you use has gone under, beyond insufficient transformation. You take raw materials, you turn it into an intermediate consumption, into a final product, so you change the HS code number, and then you qualify under the bilateral accumulation. And then the general tolerance means basically that unless specified otherwise, you have a 10% non-Canadian content which is tolerated in your product. And this tolerance is enhanced to 15% for textile and apparel and sets. So this is the main thing you have to include in your invoice. So when you're about to export, you have to use this specific certification, this origin declaration. This is something you have to put in your invoice. This is mandatory. This is what the European customs officer will take a look at to see if you are qualifying or not. This is just like self-certification. You don't have to prove that everything with pictures and everything. You just have to put these 2 sentences in your invoice. So basically, you have to write the exporter of the products covered by this document, and then the customs authorization number is basically your business number. So don't forget about it. Declare that, except where otherwise clearly indicated, these products are off, and then you have to precisely write Canada, EU, if you use also European raw materials, and that's it. It's not allowed to write Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, Alberta. Canada is the only writing allowed, because if you make the mistake here, it's highly certain that the European Customs Officer will not give you the preferential tariff. So this is formality, be aware of that. 2 sentences to include in your invoice, so don't make the mistake. Also, this is the only origin declaration that works for CETA. So if you trade with the United States, don't reutilize the origin declaration of the CUSMA. If you trade with another country with a free trade agreement, don't use the CPTPP origin declaration. What you see on your screen right now is the CETA origin declaration. Then place a date, you sign, and then you're good. And then we arrive at the point where we can make the demonstration of the European developed tool, which is ROSA, which stands for Rule of Origin Self-Assessment. So basically, okay, I have my HS code, I have my raw materials, intermediate consumption. How do I see if I'm qualifying for the rule of origin? A small demonstration of ROSA. So what you see here is like the website of Access to Market ROSA. So here, same thing. You can write HS code, or you can describe the product. We're gonna do same thing. Handbags, so 4202, as I said before, from Canada, country from, to France, because we want to export to France, let's say. You click on the button search, you see you have the nomenclature, like the tariff finder. Handbags here, okay, this is what we're looking for. We are making a handbag, leather handbag, and it's handmade, because let's say, okay, we're doing this the very Canadian way, which is totally homemade, handmade. And you see that if you want to export this handmade good, a 3% tariff applies in the European Union. Of course, then you have all the certification requirements listed here, so it's perfect. You already know what the importer and yourself need as a certification or license. Then you click here, and you have ROSA. If you click here, it will open another window that you should see as well, which is like, welcome to the rules of origin self-assessment. Okay, let's start. Check if my product is originating in Canada. And as you can see here, it gives you like different options. Like, is my product only obtained in Canada? Is my project made only from Canadian raw materials, or with a mix of originating and non-originating? So let's say, for the sake of this example, to show you the full extent of this software, what you can do with it. So let's say our handbag, is made out of Canadian and non-Canadian leather. So here, without looking at the text of the agreement, the software identifies your HS code with the specific rule of origin. So you don't have to take a look at the text of the free trade agreement. You have the rule of origin written here. Like, the rule of origin for this product, the handbag, handmade, is a change from any other heading. So like I said before, it means basically you take leather, whether it is Canadian, non-Canadian, you make a final product in Canada, and you qualify. And if you don't understand what any other heading means, you have like a fact sheet here that you can read. And this is at every stage of the ROSA tool. So let's say, for the sake of this example, you generally think that you don't qualify for the rule of origin because you did not understand the rule of origin. So none of the above apply to my product. And you should apparently not qualify for the rule of origin. But as I said before, you have the flexibilities described here, like the absorption principle, the tolerance principle, and the bilateral accumulation principle. And then you can see if you are qualifying for one of these flexibilities. So let's say, for the sake of this example, yes, you qualify for one or several of these flexibilities. And if you don't understand them, you can click and read the definition. And then ROSA tells you, I think you made a mistake. Taking this into account, you are qualifying for the rule of origin, which is written here. And then you don't have the choice. You have to click here and accept it. Okay. Then it asks you if the good was produced in Canada. So obviously, I guess so. And then if you have been beyond just the minimal operation, like I said, relabeling, repackaging. So yes. And then, based on your answer, your product is originating in Canada. Then it asks you like to do the origin declaration. Then it asks you if you respect the direct transfer rule. So let's say yes, your handbag will be shipped by a plane directly from Montreal to Paris. Wonderful. And then you have the result. And it explains why you're qualifying or why you're not qualifying. You can save it as a PDF file, send it to your customs broker, the freight forwarding company, your customers, and then discuss with them how to qualify, how to proceed. So this is a good tool that I recommend you to use. With that tool, you can identify the rule of origin and see if you qualify or not. And as you see, like, rules of origin, they differ depending on the free trade agreement. And what we see is that CETA, which was meant to be used by SMEs, they have like very flexible, very simple rules of origin compared to the CUSMA free trade agreement. For example, the general tolerance is higher than for CUSMA. The bilateral accumulation is between Canada and 27 different other countries, whereas in CUSMA it's only 3 countries, and the European Union are 27 very diverse countries. Then the origin declaration is very easy, as we've seen. It's just 2 sentences to add with the invoice, and because of the high level of trust, you will have inspection from the European or the Canadian customs only if we genuinely think that you are, trying to bypass the free trade agreement. Whereas in CUSMA, the origin declaration is more complex because you have to give specific information on the importer and on your product. So you have on the slide some example for the automotive industry, for the leather industry. So CETA favors simplicity and trust, and CETA is obviously meant to be used by SMEs. And you can compare the difference between for your specific product, the rules of origin between CETA and CUSMA with the WTO rules of origin facilitator. So you enter the product and it gives you the difference between different countries when it comes to the rule of origin, when Canada has a free trade agreement with that country. So of course, beyond just, this tariff elimination, there are like CETA removes regulatory holders like for pharmaceuticals or machinery and telecoms. So for pharmaceutical, there is a protocol in CETA for the mutual recognition of the good manufacturing practices. So basically it means that if your product is already being sold in Canada, inspected and authorized, you can send it to the European Union like in a faster way than before CETA. Still, you will have to go under like some procedures, but it will remove some redundant inspections that Canada and the European Union have agreed on. And then there is also another protocol for the mutual acceptance for conformity results for basically telecom, machinery, construction products. So at this time, this protocol basically applies mostly for telecom and machinery. So the advice I give you for the rest of the products is that if your product is already being sold in Canada, contact your certification body and ask them if you can work with them to send your good to the European Union thanks to this protocol. So ask them to see if they are recognizing both Canada and the European Union. So yeah, like I said, for the pharmaceuticals, you have this mutual recognition for good manufacturing practices. And also the good thing to know is it applies to all human pharmaceuticals, not veterinary drugs, and most of the biological product. The Annex 1 of this protocol lists all the products covered by this agreement. And then of course you can have like a patent term extensions thanks to CETA. Your product is being like reviewed by the European agencies, and the time is being reviewed, you can ask for an extension of your patent, so you protect your intellectual property for longer before your product can be sold in the European market. And for the services, I think it's time for Fabien to take the lead.
Yes, thank you, Jean Toussaint, for this very great overview of the goods chapter and the rules of origin. Before I dive into the services chapter, I just want to clarify one thing that I've been looking at the chat, and there are a few questions. When we're talking about the HS code, it's only applicable for products that are tangible, which means that if you are a service provider, and we'll look at that in the next few minutes, there are no HS codes. That's why if you're going on a tariff finder or ROSA, you will not find an HS code for your service because it's not a tangible product as per the goods chapter. So why is the services chapter important? Well, there is an untapped potential for service exporters in Canada. We're estimating that there are roughly 3,000 Canadian service companies that are in a position to export, which could bring a potential of $28 billion of service export revenues. So improving your awareness of the benefits of CETA for services will assist you in tapping into these potential revenues. When we're talking about services, we're thinking about three key areas. The first one, any physical border crossing, without any physical border crossing, sorry. So, for example, consultant writing a report, emailing across borders. That's the majority of services that we see. Then we have foreign consumption of services in Canada or in the EU. For example, tourism, international education. And at last, we have the delivery of Canadian services abroad, such as performers, engineers, and other in-market services. So what are the provisions that were negotiated in CETA under that chapter? Well, the first one is the non-discrimination obligations and the national treatment that we discussed at the introduction of this webinar. So for national treatment, we ensure that Canadian companies are treated no less favorably than EU companies when providing services in the EU. And we also ensure that if the EU grants better treatment to another country in the future, well, Canada will automatically benefit from the same advantage. And just to illustrate that with an example, if we have, for example, a Canadian consulting firm that wants to provide financial advisory services in Germany, under CETA, Germany cannot impose additional restrictions on the Canadian firm that do not apply to German firms. And if the EU later grants better conditions to another trade partner, example, Japan, well, Canada will automatically benefit without having to renegotiate CETA. The next provision is no local presence required. Why is it important? Well, many trade agreements require foreign service providers to establish a physical office in the country where they offer the services. With CETA, this barrier has been removed, and this definitely reduces costs and making it easier for Canadian businesses to operate in the EU. Then we have market access commitments. Why is it important? Well, CETA prohibits the EU from imposing limits on the number of service providers through quotas, for example. The total value of services, there are no limits on revenues, and the number of employees a company can hire. This prevents protectionist policies that block foreign competition, for example. So just to make it clearer, let's take a Toronto-based architectural firm that wins a contract to design a commercial complex in France. France cannot impose a rule that only a limited number of foreign firms can operate in the sector, and the Canadian firm can hire as many architects as needed to complete the project. The next provision, rules on the development and administration of measures. This ensures transparency in regulations affecting service providers. It requires governments to publish laws and regulations clearly, and it helps Canadian companies navigate licensing and certification requirements. As an example, let's take a Nova Scotia-based e-learning company that wants to offer online education services in Italy. Well, Italy must clearly publish its licensing requirements so the Canadian company can comply. And Italy cannot delay approvals indefinitely or introduce hidden bureaucratic barriers. Next provision, professional services provision. CETA facilitates the recognition of professional qualifications, example, engineering, accounting, legal services. It creates a framework for Canada and EU member states to negotiate mutual recognition agreements. There is one in force for architects at the moment. It's important to also keep in mind that this is not automatic, which means that it's really like the association of these professionals that need to ask their respective government to facilitate the recognition of their qualifications. So for example, the Association of Engineers of Canada could come to the government of Canada and ask us to discuss this with our CETA counterparts and facilitate their recognition. And finally, reservations are comprehensively listed. Canada and the EU reserve the right to exclude certain sectors from CETA's liberalization commitments. It also ensures protection of public services like healthcare, education, or even cultural policies. And you might have seen some instances in the media, so this should not be a big surprise that we're trying to protect as nations these sectors. So similarly to the services chapter, we have a chapter on e-commerce, and we're gonna look at some aspects and provisions that were negotiated. It's important that we have this chapter because it encourages open data flows, allowing businesses to transfer data between Canada and the EU more efficiently. However, I want you to keep in mind that EU data protection laws, better known as GDPR, remain in effect, meaning that Canadian businesses must comply when handling EU customer data. And we'll go through the GDPR requirements in a few minutes. There are also strong intellectual property protections under that chapter. It strengthens copyright, trademark, patent protections, reducing the risk of intellectual property theft for digital goods. And it ensures that Canadian e-commerce brands can protect their logos, product names and digital assets in the EU. However, one thing that I would like you to remember is that you still have to apply for your IP protection to the EU agency, and I believe that each country have their own body for that. But once you have your trademark registered, protected, then CETA will emphasize and enhance that protection. So let's look at some challenges and considerations also for Canadian e-commerce businesses. Number one, there's a need to be compliant with EU VAT rules. So Canadian e-commerce sellers must charge and remit EU value-added tax on digital goods sold to EU consumers. There's the GDPR and data localization. So while CETA promotes free data flows, as I mentioned, EU rules require that certain sensitive data remain within the EU. And there's also the local consumer protection laws. Each EU country has its own rules on refunds, warranties, and online consumer rights. So as much as it seems easy to export services because there are no tariffs, there are other regulations and rules that you have to abide by once you enter the EU market. But please keep in mind that as much as they're asking you to comply, they're also asking their local companies to abide by those rules. So it's not just because you're Canadian. So let's look at GDPR. There are a few key principles that I would like to talk about. First one, explicit consent. So companies must obtain clear and informed consent before collecting personal data. Number two, the right to access and erasure. EU citizens have the right to access, correct, and request deletion of their data, which they call the right to be forgotten. Data portability. Users can request their data to be transferred to another provider. Next principle, accountability and transparency. So companies must document how they handle data and report data breaches within 72 hours. And the last one, security measures. Businesses must protect personal data with strong cybersecurity measures. And there are legal consequences for non-compliance, and I think it's important that you hear about that. So what form does it take? Well, severe penalties. We're talking about fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is higher, and restrictions on doing business in the EU if found non-compliant. So very important that you make sure that all of these principles are respected when trying to export your product, services, sorry, to the EU. So these are just a few examples of type of services that were liberalized under CETA. So I don't think I need to go over each of them specifically. So this is a summary of GDPR. So when we'll share the presentation with you, you'll be able to go over all the information I've shared. Yes, so I'll leave it to Jérémy now for this chapter. Thank you.
In this slide, we will be covering how can CETA help facilitate short-term entry of business people into the EU's different markets. Under CETA, Canadian professionals can travel and work in the EU under specific conditions, but without needing lengthy work permits and the associated paperwork. Which means that if a Canadian IT consultant is securing a short-term contract in Spain, he will be able to enter Spain for 90 days without needing a work permit and with a simplified process to work within the EU. CETA also includes a temporary entry commitments that were made to reduce border crossing delays to member countries, such as Germany or France, for example. But please keep in mind that requirements related to immigration, such as needing a visa or proof of local licensing and qualification, still applies, which means that if you are a law firm, for example, who wants to practice law or provide service in France, you will have to abide and follow the different regulations upheld by the French government. This could include certifications for professional orders, such as chiropractors, but these have to be followed in order to do business in these specific markets. It's also important to mention that Canada and the different EU member states retain full discretion regarding immigration policies and can take measures to protect health and safety and national security at any time. Furthermore, under this agreement, there is no need for an economic needs test or quota to be applied to qualified business people seeking temporary entry under the covered categories that we will see in a couple of seconds in the next slide. This means that there is no need to prove that there is an alternative in France doing the same type of work that you're doing to be able to do so. CETA also creates certainty and predictability for business persons by reducing obstacles for eligible professionals seeking short-term entry into the EU's different markets. Next slide, please. Here we have a table of the different categories of business people that are covered under CETA, with the eligibility criteria for each category and the allowed duration of the business person stay. You can refer to this slide in the future, since the deck will be shared with all of you afterwards, which is a good table to have in case you have any questions regarding the different categories of professionals and the duration of time where they can stay. For example, for short-term business visitor, they can stay anywhere between 90 days and 6 months for attending meetings, trade fairs, or for doing market research. But the key takeaway for you all today is that this lowers costs related to HR management to work within the EU. It also has a quicker intervention to service clients within different markets, such as France and Italy, for example. And it gives more certainty and predictability in managing high-skilled staff who wants to work within the EU. I will now let my colleague Fabien continue with the next slide.
Yes, so the next chapter that we want to cover today is the government procurement chapter, which gives you access to the EU government procurement markets. This allows Canadian businesses to bid on public procurement contracts in all 27 EU member states. The scope, it applies to goods, services, and construction contracts at 3 different levels: the federal, regional, and local levels of EU governments. And in terms of size, market size, it's estimated that the EU public procurement market is worth over 2 trillion euros annually, providing a large pool of opportunities for your firms. So as an example, a Toronto-based engineering firm can now bid on construction projects for government buildings in Germany, Italy, or France, or any other 27 members, competing on equal footing with local companies. So similar treatment provisions apply than the ones we discussed previously. So Canadian companies are entitled to fair and non-discriminatory treatment when competing for government contracts in the EU. The EU governments cannot impose local content requirements or favor EU-based companies. And it eliminates the buy local policies that could have previously restricted Canadian firms from participating. So if you're a Montreal-based IT company that offers cybersecurity solutions, you are able to compete for public contracts to protect EU government websites without being discriminated against for being non-EU. When it comes to transparency in the procurement processes, there are clear procedures. The EU governments are required to publish procurement opportunities and follow transparent bidding processes. There's a deadline for responses, so time limits for submitting bids are set, and it ensures fair access to all companies. And Canadian businesses can challenge also unfair procurement practices through an established legal framework. There's a step-by-step timeline on how to apply to a EU tender through the Tenders Electronic Daily, which is a great platform that we won't demonstrate today, but we strongly recommend that you have a look. And through that platform, you are able to access the EU-wide digital procurement platforms to view and bid on public contracts, making it easier to find opportunities in all markets. And many EU member states are integrating also electronic procurement systems, streamlining the application and bidding process. Under this chapter, there's also a protection from discriminatory measures. So CETA ensures that EU member states cannot impose discriminatory measures on Canadian suppliers, such as restrictive licensing requirements or unfairly complex documentation demands. And as I said previously, companies can challenge unjust barriers to procurement. So this fosters a more open and competitive environment. As I said, I won't go through all of the steps here on the slide, but it gives you a quick overview of how it would work. Under the agreement, you have all the different requirements to be able to apply, such as what is the entity that is publishing the tender, what is the minimum threshold under which you are to apply, and what are the services and goods that are required for that specific project. And any reservations are also listed in the agreement. So if they're in the agreement, then it's okay, and you will not be able to then go back to EU authorities and say, well, I think I've been unfairly treated here. If it's listed, then it's sealed in the agreement. We'll move on to the investment chapter now.
Thank you, Fabien. It's important to specify that the investment chapter has not been fully ratified by all the EU's member states, which means that this chapter does not fully apply in all of the EU's member states. However, the investment chapter still applies to all of the EU's member states, regardless of whether they have ratified the investment chapter or not, with the exceptions of provisions such as the Investment State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, or ISDS. Which is why we mention that CETA has not been fully ratified, pending full ratification of the investment chapter by all the member states. Provisions of the investment chapter that currently apply to all member states essentially relate to non-discriminatory treatment of investors and protection of their ability to transfer funds, which means that Canadian businesses can feel comfortable transferring their assets and funds from the EU's different markets, such as Germany, France, Italy, for example, even if that particular country has not fully ratified the investment chapter. But keep in mind, the investment dispute settlement mechanism will not be enforced until all of the EU's member states have fully ratified the investment chapter. This chapter also guarantees that Canadian businesses, as I mentioned before, will be able to transfer freely all of their capital between countries and between Canada, which promotes financial stability and investor confidence in the security of the different investments that they wish to do. The agreement also guarantees that investment cannot be expropriated without fair and adequate compensation. This protection applies to both direct and indirect expropriation, ensuring that investors are treated fairly and that their assets are safeguarded against unjust actions. Finally, it's important to specify that in 2021, Canada and the EU decided to replace the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism with a new system called the Investment Court System, or ICS. This is with the aim of increasing transparency and fairness in resolving investment dispute. However, this new system is not yet in full effect, as it requires the full ratification by all the EU's member states before it can come into full force throughout all of the different markets of the EU. Now we'll take a look at the EU's grain deal, which represents a significant potential opportunities for Canadian clean tech and Canadian clean tech companies and other sectors to export their products and expertise within the EU. Furthermore, the EU has revised their plan to become net carbon neutral in 2015, which involves increasing the EU's target in reduction or emissions to 55% from 50% for 2030. This increase in reduction creates a perfect opportunity for Canadian businesses that work in carbon captured storage technology. It can help reduce the emission of different EU member states while creating opportunities for these businesses within the EU. It also helps the EU mitigate their own carbon emissions in particular sectors like oil, gas, cement, and steel production. The deal also creates a big demand for clean tech technologies, such as sustainable energy solutions, which can be filled by Canadian hydrogen fuel cell businesses. Since this technology could be used in heavy-duty vehicles like buses, trucks, trains across the EU, which also promote a zero-emission mobility as well, which is one of the objectives of the EU's Green Deal. Preserving and restoring ecosystem and biodiversity can also be an opportunity for Canadian businesses that work in land conservation, biodiversity initiative. Since partnering with groups or governments within the EU can help restore ecosystem and create opportunities for these businesses to export their service or product to do so. But these are just some of the many opportunities that this deal can create and will create. Therefore, we invite you to learn and do your own research on it as well. Furthermore, the Trade Commissioner Service has more than 160 offices across the world and Canada to help you on your export journey. If you would like to connect with us, you can do so on social media or by contacting our regional offices in Canada. You can find the contact information to get in touch with the TCS on the webpage link that you see here. You can also scan the QR code that you see on the screen to get access to this information. We also invite you to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, if that's not already been done, as well as to take a look at our different videos that we have on YouTube, which includes CETA as well as other agreements. And remember that your best point of contact to begin your export journey is with the TCS's regional offices. These offices are located in cities such as Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax to ensure that we have complete coverage throughout Canada. We would like to thank you for your time in participating in this workshop and for being here with us today. And we hope that this workshop was as insightful and helpful for you as it was for us to make.